Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you, everyone, for joining this morning. First off, I want to start off by thanking Caleb and the coaching staff for their help on this project. Clearly, it was a unique one from the beginning. Very rare in sports. You have the opportunity to come in under the circumstances that we did, and with the transition with new ownership. Caleb and I were able to help support the process of trying to maintain a high level of soccer. At the same time, we were building a new stadium, a new training ground, and at the same time, helping with the new identity for the club. And first and foremost, Caleb was a great partner in those efforts. He understood the challenge and the challenges that we faced in these unique circumstances, and he fully embraced it. Personally, we shared many special moments together, and at the top of that list was winning MLS Cup, obviously, and it was during one of the most difficult years in our professional careers. The way he led the team to the championship in those circumstances is something I'll never forget. As you saw in his statement yesterday, as well, he was all class, and I will certainly remember his contributions. But obviously, when push comes to shove in our business, it comes down to results. And when you look at the results the last 2 years, we didn't qualify for the playoffs. And, you know, what the primary cause of that this year was our inability to close out games. So while we had strong match performances, we had good, solid game plan, we were organized, we just weren't able to get the results that we needed, especially in the second halves and of matches all the way into stoppage time. So, you know, when we reflected upon the season as well as the last couple seasons, we felt like it was important that we moved on.
Thanks, Tim. We'll now begin questions from those on the call. Again, you'll need to press the raise hand button to indicate that you'd like a question. We'll start with Bailey Johnson of the Dispatch and then go to Pat Murphy of Mass Report. Go ahead, Bailey.
Hi, Tim. Obviously, a decision that was made quickly after Sunday. Caleb seemed to have a sense of what the stakes had been when we talked to him Sunday. Can you walk us through just when this started to become a consideration and then ultimately when and how the decision was made?
Yeah, the decision was made after the game against Orlando City. That said, as you saw us drop in the standings and then fall below the line, I think everyone knew, including Caleb and the coaches, that it was critical that we made the playoffs. Our goals this year were to not only make the playoffs, but to be consistent contenders. And in order to do that, it's helpful to have a home game, which means you have to finish in the top four. So clearly that was going to be a stretch. Obviously, when going into the last match, it clearly was. But we felt like if we didn't make the playoffs, it was going to be necessary to make a change. So, you know, it was a decision that became a possibility of the last couple of weeks.
Thanks, Bailey. We'll go to Pat Murphy, then Jared Smalley of NBC4. Go ahead, Pat.
Tim, you obviously have a roster you guys believe in. Obviously, decisions will have to be made here quickly on player options and whatnot. How do you make these decisions on a roster without a coach in place? And does that affect what you're looking for in a coach going forward, the decisions that you do have to make here quickly?
Mm-hmm. So we have some time before we have to make the decisions. You have until I believe mid-November, end of November per the CBA. And so clearly it would be helpful to have a coach in place by then. That might not be possible. But we do believe we have a core group of players on this roster that can contribute. But the next few weeks will be spent meeting with the players, asking them questions to reflect upon the season, making sure that they are motivated and they have a desire to be at this club and that they're willing to elevate their game and all those things that are needed in order to be not just a playoff team, but a championship team. So we will have meetings. We will continue training after this week off. And through that training period, we will continue to evaluate players and look at, obviously, contract situations. There's a number of drafts. And obviously the trade window opens up. So there's so many things that'll come into play over the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks. But Obviously, if we can get down the line with a coach, we will start talking roster decisions pretty early on, so we get a feeling from that coach in terms of their opinion on players.
And real quick, who will lead the training sessions since the staff is different?
We're having a meeting actually later today to discuss training next week. Obviously it'll be Mark Nichols will be involved with those discussions, our technical director, Laurent Courtois, Kobier, our crew 2 coaches, and some academy coaches. So we're excited about bringing both crew 2 and the first team players together to continue training over this next period until roughly November 4th, 5th.
Thanks, Pat. We'll go to Jared and then Jonathan Siegel of MLSsoccer.com. If you'd like a question after Jonathan, please raise your hand now. Go ahead, Jared.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for the time this morning. Going back to your opening statement, what you described and what we witnessed this year is one of the most unusual seasons certainly in MLS history and maybe in American pro sports history, considering the performances you described, the organization you described, the capability, and then what happened, especially late in matches. As you take a wide view look back at the season, can you just demonstrate the bizarre, unusual nature of this season and how that maybe shapes your decision-making moving forward? Folks haven't seen anything like this, and how do you go about that rebuild?
Yeah, I mean, I think sports are interesting. We enjoy them because they're unpredictable. This year was probably more unpredictable than we would have liked, and certainly more than most years. To drop 21 points in the last 15 minutes of matches, and then I think it's 11 points in stoppage time is extremely bizarre. It is strange, and because it is unusual, we need to reflect upon why that happened. And while we had to make a coaching change, it's not just a coach that bears responsibility for that. We need to talk to the players, myself included. What can we do to make sure that we have the right people on the field that can see out games? And so when I reflect upon it, if we just had half of those points from stoppage time, we would be in either 4th or 5th place. If we had even half of those points that we gave up in the last 15 minutes of matches, we'd be in 3rd place. And so we need to reflect, obviously, on the season, and that will be a major part of it. We need to determine how much of it was just unfortunate circumstances, and is it repeatable? What would happen next year if we brought a large majority of those players back? Will they be ready to overcome those challenges at the end of the game through character and focus and execution?
Thanks, Jared. We'll go to Jonathan Siegel of MLSsoccer.com. Then we'll go to Justin Holbrook from NBC4. And then if you would like another question, please raise your hand now. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hey, Tim, thanks for taking the time. From a timeline point of view, when are you hoping to have a hire in place, considering what sounds like it'll be early January preseason starting up? And secondarily, what sort of profile are you looking for? Is that kind of consistent with, let's call it, the crew way, so to speak? And as an add-on to that, kind of what's your outlook on, let's call it, MLS experience versus kind of looking outside of that bubble? Because we've seen a lot of clubs maybe follow that, and then at times they backtrack and they kind of figure out where they're going. So just trying to get some clarity on kind of how you guys are approaching this search.
Sure. So starting from preseason and working backward, January 6th we'd obviously plan and want to have our coach in place from the beginning of preseason, even though it is the earliest preseason we've had in MLS history. From there, ideally by December, although I don't, whether or not that's December 1st or mid-December, we won't know. Some of it will be determined by when we can speak to certain candidates, whether or not we are looking to talk to coaches who are still playing. That all factors in. So I would say by December, we're hoping to have it finalized. But as we all know, these things are unpredictable. In terms of the criteria of our coaching search, it's going to be a wide search. We want to follow a clear process, establish criteria for the position, and be disciplined in that criteria and the evaluation. We want to make sure that we look at all layers domestically, not just in MLS, present and past coaches, but possibly in other layers of the U.S. soccer structure and Canadian soccer, for that matter. We'll look internationally. We've already received a number of CVs and interest in the past 24 hours. And when it comes to the criteria, we're evaluating that now. But first and foremost, it starts with the person, making sure that they have the shared values of our club. We're an ambitious club. We want to consistently contend for championships. We want to take care of our supporters. We want to give back to the community. We want to make sure that that person has values that are aligned with our leadership team and our ownership. The second is this idea that they are a part of a club, and our club model, in that there's a first team and crew 2 now in our academy and the crew youth in the community, and understanding their role in the broader sense of the club is very important. I think it's becoming extremely competitive in Major League Soccer. And in order for the Columbus Crew to remain competitive, we need to find competitive advantages. And in Columbus, that's going to require us to be aligned from top to bottom, and not just in values, but in style of play, in principles, in the way we conduct ourselves, analytics, performance. Are we focused? Are we looking for ways to be different? Those are all things that'll be critical for the job search. And then the last piece is obviously the coach, in terms of their tactics and the way they approach the game, their organization, how they see the game. It needs to align with the way we see it at the club, how they lead, what type of players they like in the locker room. So these are all the buckets that we'll be exploring to determine, the priorities for each candidate.
Thanks, Jonathan. We'll go to Justin, and then Bailey, and then Patrick, and likely after that, any final questions after Patrick, please raise your hand now. Go ahead, Justin. Justin, can you hear us? All right, sounds like we're having issues with Justin's mic. We'll go to Bailey and then Pat. Go ahead, Bailey.
Tim, going off of what you just said about the coaching search, I think a lot of external eyes over the last 24 hours have turned to the other coach in your building who won a championship over the weekend. Will looking at the coaches you have, specifically Laurent, be a part of this process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'd like to sit down and speak to Laurent. Obviously, he's done a tremendous job with Crew 2 as Kobier and the entire staff, Corey Ray, in terms of the roster that we've built internally. Laurent has a lot of attributes that will make him a successful coach, not just in MLS Next Pro, but one day in MLS. And so as we start this process, I would like to sit down and talk to him, and he'd be included. Absolutely.
Thanks, Bailey. We'll go to Pat Murphy, and then Justin, if we get you back, we'll go for you. And if you'd like a question after Pat, please raise your hand now. Go ahead, Pat.
Tim, you mentioned referencing the last 15 minutes of games, but that not everything falls on the head coach necessarily. And I assume that is the case with overall not making the playoffs failure, however you want to describe it. When you look at yourself, your staff, just kind of how do you guys approach this offseason, kind of looking in the mirror beyond Caleb? I know he's the one as the head coach that kind of falls on the sword and he took responsibility, but as an organization, what has to happen to make sure that this team isn't in this same position next year beyond just a head coach?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first and foremost, Pat, it starts with the roster, making sure that you have the talent required to compete in this league. We think we do, but beyond talent are the pieces functioning properly? Are we organized, and do we have the right type of leadership necessary to compete and succeed throughout an entire season, 34 games? Next year is going to be a unique one with Leagues Cup sandwiched right in the middle. So it first and foremost, it starts with making sure that we have the right roster, a blend of experience and core roster players. And then right now we have a number of players that are being promoted from Crew 2 to the first team, not just the players who got minutes like Ashawn Zawatz, Gabriel Sands, but Jason Russell-Rowe and Mo Farsi, who've emerged and provided a bright spot on the roster. The other thing is we have solid investment from our ownership, and the resources that we have allow us to create a professional environment for our team. And that starts here at Ohio Health Performance Center and day-to-day work. And we have to make sure that the environment continues to stay at a high level. We will not be spending at the top of the league. We need to be targeted like we were with Lucas and Cucho, but that won't be something that we'll be able to do every year. That's just the reality of our situation. We'll be outside of the top 10. And so we need to figure out how we're aligned from top to bottom, from first team, Crew 2, and the academy. And so that'll be taking a deeper dive into scouting and recruitment, analytics, performance and recovery to make sure we're limiting our injuries, nutrition. We do think we have a fantastic environment here. And so how do we make the most of it? Not just in the facilities, but in sort of the human capital piece.
Thanks, Pat. We'll go to our final question, back to Jonathan Siegel. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hey, Tim, it's having spotty Wi-Fi. I hope this holds up. A two-parter. First being you hinted at or said explicitly there might be the exploration of talking to coach candidates within the league who are still even playing. How serious is that something you're looking to pursue as a club? We've seen a Greg Vanney move, Bob Bradley. I know through different circumstances, of course. And secondarily, especially at the top end of the roster, how much change, if at all, do you guys envision this year? Are we going to see, meaning into the offseason, is this kind of the core of that nucleus of a Lucas, a Cucho, Darlington, Eloy, Mensah? You could go down the list. Just trying to get a sense of what this offseason might look like in terms of potential significant change, or if it's hey, we're going to run it back because we believe in these guys.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't comment obviously specifically on any interest in the coaches that are currently playing. My point is just we need to figure out the full candidate list, and when the season winds down and finishes for all the teams, only then would you really know who's available and who's not. So certainly teams that have success in our league is one of the critical factors that will be used when determining who are the best candidates. And so some of the teams obviously are having great success, and so we would be interested in talking if they were available. Number two, in terms of the core players that we would look to possibly change, it's just so early right now. We're still evaluating. We haven't even had a chance to sit down and fully go through the roster yet. We have over 3 weeks to continue training, to sit down with players, and only then can we truly understand if we're going to make any changes to sort of the core group. We think that we have a talented core group, and so we would like to keep most of it in place. If you would ask me today, but again, we can sit down again at the end of the training period, and I'll make myself available to the media to discuss what the plans are moving forward.
Just a quick one to tack on at the end. How does the league's diversity hiring protocol impact the search here, if at all? That's something that was instituted, I want to say, a little bit over a year ago. And just as a chief soccer officer, curious how you guys kind of wade through that, because I know it's something the league takes very seriously.
Absolutely. Well, the DEI initiative is fundamental to establishing a good process and finding the best candidate. So we will work closely with Shola and the league office to make sure that we have all the elements in place. We understand that they have a list of coaches that may be either available or obviously qualify under this initiative. So we're, we're not only looking to comply, but we're excited about using that process to enhance our search.
Thanks, Jonathan. And thank you, everyone. That's going to conclude our availability today. As